The gavel cracks through the room like thunder. Cameras flash in a staccato rhythm, a chorus of shutters chasing history. The air is thick, not with noise, but with tension that hums under every heartbeat. Jerome Powell sits centered under fluorescent light, his hands folded like a man born for composure. His face doesn't move. His jaw doesn't twitch. He's mastered the art of being untouchable, a monument of calm in a storm he helped build. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett doesn't blink. Her papers are already in order, but her focus isn't on them. It's on him. She's not here to make headlines. She's here to make him answer. The kind of answer no one in that room has ever demanded, at least not out loud. "Chairman Powell," she begins, voice even but edged with steel. The microphones pick up every syllable. The murmurs fade. Her tone isn't loud, but it cuts clean through the pretense of politeness. "I just want to be absolutely clear on one thing." A hush ripples across the committee. The aides look up. A journalist lowers her pen mid-note. Powell nods, slow and serene, the way only men who've never been cornered nod. "Of course, Congresswoman," he says softly, like a reflex more than a reply. Crockett leans forward, her eyes never leaving his. The question that follows is short, too short. It lands without warning, like a dropped match in dry grass. The room reacts before he does. A gasp, a chair scraping back. Someone at the press table mutters, "Did she just—" Reporters scramble, pens suddenly frantic, screens lighting up. Powell doesn't speak. His lips part, then close again. The color drains just slightly from his face, not enough for the cameras to notice, but enough for everyone in the room to feel. Crockett doesn't move. She's motionless, waiting. The silence grows so heavy it bends the air, stretching seconds into an eternity. Outside the hearing room, America is still scrolling, unaware that a single question has just pierced the illusion of economic certainty. But before America heard his answer, the room itself seemed to realize something irreversible had just been said. Long before that question echoed through the hearing room, the story had already begun, not with headlines, but with a quiet decision made behind closed doors. $6 trillion, printed, injected, and justified as stability. The kind of number so large it feels imaginary until you realize who paid for it, and who didn't. While Wall Street's marble towers gleamed under the bailout sun, kitchen tables across the country were stacked with overdue bills. Families stretched paychecks thin, watching prices creep higher while billionaires turned crisis into opportunity. Quantitative easing, they called it, a phrase that floated like incense, hiding the smoke underneath. Powell had been the face of reassurance through it all. The man who promised that money itself could be engineered to save America, but the more he spoke of balance and foresight, the more unbalanced everything became. Behind the speeches and data charts, something broke trust. Working people began to feel like extras in a script written for someone else. Powell didn't see that part. He didn't have to. The Fed's marble walls don't echo with stories from grocery lines or eviction courts. They echo with confidence, forecasts, and faith in models that never feel hunger. But Jasmine Crockett had seen the other side. Long before she ever faced Powell, she'd sat across from families, trying to understand why they were still falling. Behind in an economy supposedly recovered, carried those stories with her. The mother who lost her savings to a bank fee that made no sense, the veteran who couldn't afford rent in the city he helped rebuild. To them, money wasn't abstract. It was air, night after night. Well, Crockett sat in her office with nothing but a desk lamp and a mountain of documents no one else had bothered to read. Numbers that told a story few wanted to hear, that $6 trillion had not disappeared. It had been transferred, quietly, elegantly, legally, and every decimal told a truth that contradicted the official line. She highlighted, cross-referenced, built a timeline. Every footnote was a breadcrumb leading back to the same conclusion that America's most powerful institution had forgotten its most powerless people. And the man at the top, the one celebrated as the steady hand of the economy, had become its shield against accountability. Her team warned her, "Be careful. He's untouchable." But Crockett wasn't chasing spectacle. She wasn't here to trend. She was here to tell the truth, even if it made the comfortable squirm. By the time the hearing arrived, she already knew what she'd ask. She rehearsed it in her head during sleepless nights, trimmed every unnecessary word until the question became pure voltage, one sentence strong enough to cut through an empire of excuses. That's why, when she finally leaned into that microphone, there was no hesitation. It wasn't anger that steadied her voice. It was purpose. A purpose born from watching people who do everything right still lose everything anyway. Because for Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't a debate over interest rates. It was a reckoning over fairness, over power, over the invisible architecture of privilege disguised as policy. And as the camera zoomed in, as Powell's stillness began to look less like control and more like fear, the world finally saw what this hearing was really about. She wasn't just questioning numbers. She was questioning who America's economy was truly built to serve. Jerome Powell had built a career out of being unshakable. When markets panicked, he spoke softly. When the economy convulsed, he smiled with fatherly restraint. To investors, he was the voice of calm, the steady hand on the wheel when the nation flirted with chaos. His tone never rose, his posture never bent, his face never betrayed an ounce of doubt. He was the man who made crisis look like control. Reporters loved that about him. Television anchors called him measured. Editorials praised his discipline. Every press conference followed the same ritual. Powell would walk to the podium, glance briefly at his notes, and begin with that low, a deliberate tone that could make even a trillion-dollar disaster sound like a minor technicality. He turned language into anesthesia, transforming panic into patience. He wasn't born to politics. He came from money, law, and investment, the world where problems were assets in disguise. The kind of rooms where people spoke in forecasts, not feelings. His education had taught him that emotion clouds judgment, that confidence is currency. And so he learned to filter empathy out of his decisions, to see the world not as a struggle between rich and poor, but as a set of levers to be pulled in the name of balance. But in that detachment lay the flaw. He believed he could engineer trust without earning it, that the economy was a machine, predictable, obedient, mechanical, and that if he just turned the right dials, the human fallout would take care of itself. When the pandemic hit, and panic spread through the markets, Powell made his defining move. $6 trillion of liquidity, unleashed like an ocean onto the financial system. To him, it was heroic, a firewall against collapse. The data confirmed it, at least on the surface. The stock market soared, the banks stabilized, confidence returned. He'd done it. He'd kept America afloat, but outside the glass towers, something else was happening. Rent doubled in cities where wages barely moved. The price of milk rose faster than raises did. Small businesses closed while tech giants multiplied their profits. Powell saw numbers. Families saw consequences. To him, inflation was a chart. To them, it was dinner. When critics raised alarms, Powell brushed them aside with elegant phrasing. Transitory pressures, supply constraints, temporary dislocations. He always sounded certain. Even when he wasn't. That was his gift, the power to make complex pain sound manageable. But beneath that composure lurked a quiet arrogance, the belief that the suffering of millions was a variable, not a verdict. Behind closed doors, his colleagues admired his restraint. They called him the adult in the room, unaware that his calm had become a mask, one he wore so long. He forgot where it ended and where he began. He wasn't blind to the public's anger. He simply didn't feel it could touch him. The marble halls of the Federal Reserve don't echo with outrage. They echo with strategy, consensus, and self-congratulation. He didn't see himself as part of the elite. He saw himself as a guardian, the steward of stability, the protector of order. When markets trembled, he steadied them. When confidence waned, he spoke it back into existence. And every time he emerged unscathed from another round of questioning, his myth deepened. The man who could stare down Congress, Wall Street, and public fury without breaking a sweat. Yet the cracks were forming. His explanations began to sound recycled. His reassurances thinner. The public that once saw him as a savior began to see him as a symbol of distance, of indifference, of power untested by accountability. And maybe deep down, Powell knew it. Maybe he felt the weight of decisions made in the quiet hours, the human cost hidden beneath policy triumphs. But he also knew the unspoken rule of his world: admit nothing, concede nothing, appear certain. Because in his universe, uncertainty was weakness, and weakness invited panic. That was why, as he walked into that congressional hearing, he didn't flinch. To him, this was routine. Another round of performative scrutiny. He would charm the cameras, parry the questions, and leave unscathed, as always. He believed the outcome was already written. He straightened his tie, adjusted his papers, and nodded to the staffer beside him. Outside, the press waited for sound bites. Inside, the stage lights burned steady. He'd been here before. He thought he knew the rhythm. But he didn't see her yet, the congresswoman whose calm was not polished, but purposeful. The one who had come not to admire his balance, but to test it. He thought this hearing would be routine, but this time, the numbers would talk back. Before the cameras, before the marble walls and clipped microphones, Jasmine Crockett was just a woman standing in a crowded courtroom in Dallas. Watching a system tilt against the people who trusted it most, she'd come to law not out of ambition, but out of anger. The quiet, grinding anger that builds when you've seen too many good people lose to loopholes in fine print. Her first clients weren't powerful. They were the forgotten ones. Janitors, single mothers, veterans, teenagers accused of things they didn't do. Every case left a mark, and every injustice left her voice a little sharper, her resolve a little deeper. She learned early that justice didn't come from shouting. It came from precision, from knowing when to pause, when to strike, and when to let silence do the cutting. Judges called her emotional. Opposing counsel called her aggressive. But clients called her the one who listens. And that, to her, was the only title that mattered. There were nights when she'd drive home past downtown skyscrapers, their windows glowing like constellations. I wonder how many decisions made up there decided the fates of the people down here. She'd park outside her apartment, still replaying court transcripts in her head, and whisper to herself, "They think we don't notice, but we do." Her rise wasn't smooth. It never is for those who choose confrontation over comfort. She'd been talked over in hearings, patronized on live panels, warned by senior figures to tone it down if she wanted longevity. But every dismissal, every condescending smile became a spark. Somewhere between the case files and the protests, the frustration turned to fire. When she stepped into public office, she didn't do it for the photo ops. She did it because she'd seen too many people crushed under policies that sounded noble on paper but brutal in practice. In her district, the slogans about growth and recovery didn't match reality. Growth meant investors. Recovery meant inflation. She carried those contradictions into every room she entered, refusing to let politeness blur the truth. Her speeches weren't polished. They were raw, rhythmic, electric. She didn't speak like a politician. She spoke like someone who'd been on the receiving end of policy. Her words didn't aim for applause. They aimed for awakening. If fairness is negotiable, she once said at a community rally, then justice is already for sale. The crowd had gone silent, not because the line was perfect, but because it was real. Yet even heroes questioned themselves. There were moments of doubt when the fight seemed endless. Nights when she wondered if her voice was changing anything at all. Watching the same people rise, while the same families fell, it wears on the spirit. But she'd always find her way back. Sometimes it was a letter from a client who finally got their home back. Sometimes it was the quiet thanks, whispered after a town hall by someone too tired to hope, but still trying. Those small, private victories became her fuel. They reminded her why she stayed unpolished, why she refused to adopt the language of the powerful. Every statistic she quoted came with a face behind it. Every question she asked came from a story she couldn't forget. So when the opportunity came to question Jerome Powell, it wasn't politics to her, it was personal. She saw in him everything she'd spent her life pushing against. The calm authority of a man insulated from consequence. He spoke about the economy as if it were a concept. She lived among the people who felt its weight. His balance sheets never bled. Hers did. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, She buried herself in data, late nights under fluorescent light, scrolling through documents that most would never read. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't speak either. She had to translate them into truth. She annotated every chart with stories from her constituents: the grocery store clerk who worked 3 jobs, the teacher whose rent doubled, the retired nurse whose pension barely stretched past the 15th of each month. To Powell, they were inflationary side effects. To her, they were the human cost of indifference. She didn't want revenge. She wanted revelation, a moment where power would have to confront the people it pretended to protect. And she knew it wouldn't come through shouting. It would come through one perfectly constructed question, shaped by years of frustration and sharpened by experience. In front of the mirror one morning, she practiced her delivery, steady and calm. It's not anger they fear, she reminded herself. It's clarity. She smiled, barely, because she knew that when clarity came, it would cut deeper than any accusation. When she finally walked into that hearing, she wasn't thinking of headlines or viral clips. She was thinking of the faces behind the statistics. The people who deserved to be seen by the man who'd turned their struggles into a policy footnote. Every step she took down that aisle felt like walking through every courtroom, every rally, every sleepless night that had brought her here. And when she took her seat, papers stacked neatly before her, she felt the weight of years settle into calm. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was ready. She'd waited her whole career for one moment like this, and it arrived in the form of a single, devastating question. The air in the hearing room feels alive, charged with invisible static. Cameras hover, pens ready. Powell adjusts his microphone, the soft rasp of his papers breaking the silence. He begins with the confidence of a man who's given this speech before. "Congresswoman," he says smoothly, "we're dealing with complex economic forces, unforeseen pressures, following an unprecedented crisis. Our actions were necessary to preserve long-term stability." His voice is even almost soothing, the practiced cadence of control. Crockett listens without blinking, her hand steady over her notes. "Long-term stability," she repeats, the words deliberate, heavy. "Chairman, could you clarify stability for whom?" He smiles faintly, that diplomatic curve of the lips meant to disarm. "For the American economy as a whole. For markets?" For she interrupts, gently but firmly. "You said markets, not families." Powell hesitates just long enough for the cameras to catch it. A flicker, a glitch in the machine. He regains rhythm quickly. "Families benefit when the economy is strong, Congresswoman. When employment is stable, when credit flows freely, credit flows." She cuts in. "To whom? Because my constituents aren't getting loans. They're getting evictions. You added $6 trillion into circulation, but you're telling me it didn't end up in their hands? So again, who exactly benefited?" Her tone isn't angry. It's surgical. Each word lands like the click of a lock turning. Powell glances toward the committee chair, then back to her, calculating. "It's important not to view these programs in isolation," he replies. "Liquidity measures are designed to support the broader system." "The broader system." Echoes, leaning forward now. "You mean Wall Street?" A murmur ripples through the audience. Powell's jaw tightens barely, but enough. He clears his throat. "Wall Street is part of that system, yes, but the benefits are trickle down." She finishes. The phrase lands like a strike, because from where I'm sitting, what trickled down wasn't prosperity. It was pain. The room exhales a low gasp. Powell looks down at his notes, his composure fraying at the edges. He recites numbers, charts, projections, the shield of statistics. Crockett doesn't counter with figures. She counters with faces. "Chairman, I've spoken to teachers, veterans, nurses. They watched their rent rise, their savings shrink, while your policies made billionaires richer. Are they just collateral damage in your model of success?" He leans back, folding his hands. "We can't conflate short-term hardship with policy failure," he says. "Economic recovery takes time." "How much time?" She fires back. "Because it's been years since that $6 trillion left your balance sheets, and they're still waiting for the recovery you promised." The sound in the room changes, softer, slower, like collective breath being held. Powell looks at her as if seeing her for the first time, realizing this isn't political theater. It's interrogation. He tries to pivot. Our responsibility is to ensure systemic stability. If we lose confidence in the markets, Crockett interrupts again, quieter this time. Confidence in the markets? Or confidence in you? That lands harder than volume ever could. He blinks once, twice. The man who never loses composure is now visibly weighing his next word. She presses on, voice low but unrelenting. Chairman, you've said again and again that your decisions were made to protect the American economy. But every report, every chart, every piece of data shows that the wealth gap widened under your watch. So when you say stability, what you really mean is comfort for the already comfortable. Powell's fingers tap the table. He gives a careful smile, to practice to be sincere. I understand your concerns, Congresswoman, but economic management requires perspective beyond short-term optics. Crockett doesn't flinch. Perspective, she says softly. That's easy to have when you've never missed a bill payment. When the crisis is theoretical to you, but life or death to someone else. He starts to respond, but she speaks over him, not louder, but clearer. You talk about data, I talk about people. You defend balance sheets, I defend balance. Tension in the room becomes a living thing. The staffers exchange glances. The reporter's fingers hover above keyboards, waiting. Powell opens his mouth, searching for the tone that saved him in every crisis before. But this time, the rhythm doesn't come. Crockett sits back, eyes steady, silence stretching between them like a drawn line. Then, she glances at her notes, the hint of a knowing smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Because she isn't finished. Not yet. But it was her next question, calm, surgical, and backed by receipts, that turned the room cold. The room is silent. Not the polite silence of protocol, but the kind that happens when something irreversible is about to unfold. Crockett's eyes don't leave Powell's. Her fingertips rest on a folder. The kind that looks ordinary until it isn't. She opens it slowly, the soft rustle of paper amplified by the microphones. Chairman Powell, she begins, voice calm, almost conversational. Earlier you said the Fed's $6 trillion intervention was about stability for the American economy as a whole. Powell nods, relieved for familiar ground. That's correct, Congresswoman. It was essential to maintain confidence. Confidence, she echoes, flipping the page. That's an interesting word, because what I see here, she lifts the document, is that during that same period, the top 1% of Americans gained nearly $7 trillion in new wealth. The words hang there, not shouted, not dramatized, just presented. Powell blinks, his composure faltering for half a heartbeat. Crockett continues, her tone tightening. Meanwhile, real wages for the bottom half of earners fell. Their savings evaporated. And home ownership rates among Black and Latino families dropped to their lowest point in a decade. The first ripple of murmurs stirs the chamber. Powell glances toward his aides. They look down, suddenly fascinated by their papers. So, she says, her voice steady, deliberate, you told this committee your policies preserved stability? I'm just trying to understand stability for whom? Powell straightens in his chair. Congresswoman, economic disparities are a multifaceted issue. Monetary policy can't directly control income distribution. She nods slowly. Can't control, she repeats, but can influence. And you influenced $6 trillion? You chose where it went. Into the markets, into asset purchases, into the hands of those who already owned everything worth owning. He exhales through his nose. We were preventing collapse. Crockett leans forward. Collapse for Wall Street or Main Street? That one lands. Powell's mouth opens, then closes again. He adjusts his glasses, the universal gesture of stalling for time. The cameras catch it, the first real tell. She continues, calm as a surgeon. Because, Mr. Chairman, here's what this chart says. She slides another page forward, one line climbing, the other sinking. The wealth of America's billionaires doubled while essential workers rationed gas money. You call that stability? My constituents call it betrayal. He shifts in his seat. That's a deeply emotional framing, Congresswoman. No, she cuts in, her voice a clean blade. It's a factual one. Her words slice through the room like the first crack of thunder before a storm. Powell adjusts his microphone again. There were unintended consequences. Unintended, she says quietly, but not unforeseen. You had reports warning that quantitative easing would widen inequality? You read them. You ignored them. Powell's gaze hardens. With respect, Congresswoman, the decisions made under my leadership prevented a far worse downturn. Millions of jobs. Jobs that pay less now than they did before your intervention. She fires back. Jobs without pensions, without health care, without security. You stabilize the markets, not the people who make those markets function. Powell looks down. A pause. The kind of pause that feels too long on live television. Crockett leans closer, lowering her voice just enough that it forces the room to listen harder. So, Chairman Powell, are you saying a $6 trillion decision had no winners and losers? He hesitates. A muscle in his jaw tightens. Congresswoman, yes or no? She presses, unflinching. Did your decisions create winners and losers? Powell's gaze drifts to the cameras, the committee, his notes. Every exit is blocked by truth. He adjusts his glasses again, clears his throat. In retrospect, he pauses. The silence stretches. There were distributional effects that were not fully anticipated. It's not loud. It's not dramatic, but it lands like an earthquake. The collective inhale from the audience is almost audible. Aides freeze. Reporters' keyboards explode into motion. The committee chair blinks, unsure whether to interject or let the moment breathe. Crockett doesn't gloat. She doesn't need to. She simply nods once, like a surgeon confirming a successful incision. Thank you for your honesty, she says. That's all I needed to hear. Powell shifts again, realizing what just happened, that in one sentence, his legacy became a headline. Across the room, phones light up. Tweets start mid-typing. Powell admits Fed policy widened inequality. Crockett corners Fed chair with brutal question. The viral moment is already forming, pixel by pixel, faster than he can recover. He tries to reclaim ground. I'd like to clarify that these effects are complex, she cuts in one last time. Complex for you. Catastrophic for everyone else. The line hits like a final note in a symphony of restraint. The audience exhales again, somewhere between shock and applause. Even those who don't agree with her politics can't deny what they've just witnessed. Control meeting conscience and losing. Powell lowers his gaze, folding his hands over the table. His mind races the interviews he'll have to give, the statements to draft, the damage to contain. For the first time, the architect of calm looks uncertain. And behind that uncertainty, something else doubts. Maybe she's right. Maybe the numbers were always too clean, too bloodless. Maybe $6 trillion can't fix a moral deficit. Crockett gathers her papers, the faint scrape of her chair the only sound. The hearing isn't over, but the narrative has already shifted. Powell knows it. Everyone does. One by one, cameras refocus on her, the woman who just made the most powerful man in American finance say the one thing he spent years avoiding in retrospect. The gavel strikes once, jolting the room back to formality. But the air doesn't settle. Reporters rush toward the exits, phones pressed to ears, voices urgent. Run that clip. Run it now. Powell looks down at his notes, but the numbers blur. The charts, once his fortress, now feel like paper walls. And Crockett. She sits back, calm as ever, a quiet fire behind her eyes. She's not celebrating. She's witnessing. Because she knows beyond the walls of this room that clip is already spreading. In living rooms, on timelines, in the spaces where people once felt invisible, within minutes, that moment would explode beyond the walls of Congress. It starts as a spark, a 30-second clip, trimmed from a 3-hour hearing. Someone posted on X with the caption, "She asked what no one else dared to." Within minutes, it's everywhere. Retweets multiply. Hashtags bloom like wildfire. Hashtag 6 trillion mistake. Hashtag Crockett vs Fed. Hashtag truth over power. On TikTok, The moment plays on loop. Users stitch it with reactions, gasps, applause, tears. A nurse in Detroit records herself saying, "I worked 3 jobs while they bailed out billionaires. She said it for us." A teacher from El Paso adds, "They always said economics was too complicated. Turns out it's just too convenient." The comments flood. Finally, someone gets it. She didn't flinch. This is history. By nightfall, the clip reaches the late-night circuit. A comedian holds up Powell's quote in retrospect and says, translation, "We accidentally made the rich richer. Oops." The audience roars. The punchlines sting, but the truth beneath them lingers. Morning news panels scramble to catch up. One anchor says Crockett's questioning struck a nerve while another counters, "Let's remember, the Fed's actions were about preventing collapse." The debate hums. But the public's mind is made. Polls flicker on screen. Who do you trust more on the economy, Powell or Crockett? By noon, her line graph shoots skyward. Think pieces spill across every outlet. The congresswoman who made the Fed blink, the $6 trillion question, power, race, and the economics of accountability. Some celebrate her bravery. Others dissect her tone, her timing, her gender. But every word keeps her name in the headlines. Every article another echo in the growing chorus, she asked. He flinched. Behind the scenes, the tremors reached deeper. Treasury officials exchanged tight-lipped emails. Policy aides whisper about new optics. Economists draft memos hinting at distributional transparency. The conversation Powell spent years avoiding now has a life of its own. Loud, insistent, unstoppable. Wall Street, too, feels the shift. Traders joke nervously in private chats. Guess we're the bad guys again. But the markets twitch anyway. Uncertainty isn't good for profit, and Crockett's moment made certainty feel dishonest. Meanwhile, activists seize momentum. Petitions call for audits. Grassroots organizers plan people over profit rallies. A viral GoFundMe launches to educate America on who really benefits. Within a day, it crosses $1 million. Crockett's office is flooded, calls, emails, letters written in uneven handwriting. A single mother in Chicago writes, "You made him say it. You made him admit what we've known for years." A retired veteran signs off his note. Finally, someone fighting for the rest of us. Her staff watches the numbers climb on every screen, stunned by the scale. They expected a clip. They didn't expect a movement. Powell, in contrast, faces a different kind of silence. Cable pundits replay his hesitation frame by frame. Was this the moment the Fed lost its moral shield? One asks. Editorial boards demand explanations. The American people deserve clarity. One headline reads, "Not complexity." Inside the marble walls of financial power, the tone shifts from calm to defensive. Closed-door meetings run late. Aides draft statements with surgical precision. Chairman Powell's remarks were taken out of context. But the context is the problem. People have stopped believing in it. Everywhere, symbols of reversal appear. Protesters chalk $6 trillion mistake outside bank headquarters. College students quote her in classrooms. Even some Fed economists, off the record, admit she wasn't wrong. We knew inequality was a risk, but not that it would define us. By week's end, the cultural current is unmistakable. The clip has surpassed 10 million views. Her line, "So who exactly benefited?" is printed on shirts, mugs, memes. Commentators compare her moment to the great political reckonings of past decades, truth cutting through decorum. And still, through all the noise, Crockett stays quiet. No victory laps, no interviews. Just a short post. Accountability isn't personal. It's overdue. The simplicity strikes harder than any headline. Late that night, Powell sits in his study, replaying the footage. He listens not to her question, but to the silence after it. The sound of something shifting that no amount of data can smooth over. Outside, protesters chant faintly in the distance, their voices mixing with the echo of her words. Across the country, people who've never watched a congressional hearing before are talking about monetary policy at dinner tables, on buses, in break rooms. What started as a hearing has become a reckoning, not about rates or bonds, but about values. The nation's pulse feels different now. Something unmasked. Something awake. But for Jasmine Crockett, the victory wasn't viral, it was moral. The noise fades, but the meaning lingers. The hashtags begin to cool. The headlines shift to the next controversy. Yet something about that moment refuses to dissolve. For Jasmine Crockett, the real reckoning isn't in the cameras or the trending charts. It's in the silence that follows. She sits in her office late that night, the city still humming below her window. The hearing replay runs on mute, but she doesn't need the sound. She remembers every pause, every flicker in Powell's eyes, every syllable that carried the weight of $6 trillion. Her aide enters, hesitant. "You know, you broke the internet, right?" he says, trying for levity. She smiles faintly. "The internet was easy," she replies. "Breaking denial, that's the hard part." On her desk lie handwritten letters from across the country. One from a single dad in Ohio. "I work 2 jobs, and I finally understand why it still feels like I'm drowning." Another from a college student. "You made me believe the system can be questioned, and that matters." She reads them slowly, carefully, as if each word is an oath. Because to her, they are. Outside, the Capitol stands as it always has, imposing marble, immovable. But Jasmine knows something shifted inside its halls. Not just policy, not even perception, permission. Permission for people to demand more than jargon and justification. To ask who benefits and who's left behind. She thinks about what Powell said, distributional effects. It's so neat, so bloodless. And yet, behind every effect, there's a story. A mother skipping dinner so her child can eat. A retiree watching savings erode, a dream deferred because stability came with conditions. That's what this fight was always about. Not just numbers, names. Not just accountability, humanity. She exhales. Not from exhaustion, but clarity. If $6 trillion can vanish into balance sheets, she murmurs, half to herself, then maybe it's time we ask who keeps writing them. In that sentence, the mission refocuses. This was never about a viral moment. It was about recentering truth in a system built to obscure it. To remind America that power without empathy is just calculation. Somewhere in the building, a cleaner vacuums the hallway, the low hum, steady, grounding. Jasmine watches the night deepen beyond the window. The city lights glimmer, a reminder that even in the dark, there's movement, persistence, purpose. She's not naive. She knows one question won't rewrite an economy, won't undo decades of imbalance. But she also knows that every reckoning begins with someone daring to ask out loud what everyone else whispers in frustration. And maybe that's what leadership really is, not having all the answers, but refusing to pretend the questions don't matter. Her phone buzzes with a new message. A colleague, another lawmaker. "They want you on the morning shows," it reads. She types back, "Let the clip speak. I've said enough." Because she understands something rare in politics, that silence, when earned, can be louder than applause. The hearing might be over, but the aftershock is still rolling through the country in boardrooms, classrooms and living rooms. People who never thought about the Federal Reserve are now thinking about fairness. People who once shrugged at policy now talk about accountability. That's not scandal. That's awakening. Jasmine leans back, letting the weight of it all settle, the scrutiny, the praise, the fatigue, the faith. She feels neither victorious nor vindicated, only resolved. Because truth doesn't need to win the news cycle. It only needs to outlast the lie. And tonight, it did. She looks at the Capitol dome once more, its glow faint but steady. Real leadership, she whispers, isn't about defending mistakes. It's about owning them. Aside, the night carries on, unaware, unbothered, infinite. But somewhere beneath its stillness, the echo of her question, that one quiet, devastating question, continues to ripple outward. The hearing ended, but what it revealed about power, pride, and who pays for both is still echoing. In a world where money speaks louder than truth, one question can still shake the system. One voice, steady, unshaken, can remind us that power, no matter how polished, is not beyond accountability. You watched it happen. The silence. the hesitation, the truth slipping through a single sentence in retrospect. It wasn't just an admission, it was a mirror, a reflection of how easily justice gets priced out of the conversation, and how deeply this country still craves honesty from those who govern it. Jasmine Crockett didn't just ask about numbers. She asked about values, about who this economy is built for and who keeps it standing when the weight gets too heavy. And in that moment, beneath the marble ceilings and fluorescent light, the story of America shifted just a little, from silence to exposure, from complacency to clarity, because that's the power of truth. It doesn't need permission to echo. It just needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. So now the question turns to you. If accountability matters to you, don't just watch, witness. Speak. Share. Push the conversation forward. Because silence is how systems stay standing, and stories like this are how they start to shake. Share this story. Subscribe for the voices that refuse to stay silent. Because when truth speaks, power listens. The hearing may be over, but the call isn't. It's out here now, in every conversation. Every repost, every moment someone chooses integrity over indifference. And as the last echo of the gavel fades, one truth remains. The powerful can control the room, but not the reckoning that follows.